Good morning to our listeners here in Jamaica. Good morning as well to our listeners in the New York diaspora. This is Jamaica Live. I'm Bruce Goling. We broadcast here through Bridge 99 and as well through Irie Jam in New York. Today is the 24th of April, our last program for this month, and it's amazing how quickly the months go by. We do this every Monday. We try to focus our minds on particular issues. We take one issue each week. We don't jump all over the place. We take one issue each week and we try to dive into it. We try to bring to the program people who have the expertise to help us to understand the issues, the problems, the causes, the solutions. And we hope that we're able to help our listeners to better understand these issues and naturally come to their own opinions, make their own conclusions, but to do so with a better understanding. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99 and Irie Jam. I've been watching the network television stations in America. They're all carrying this breaking news that Tucker Carlson will no longer be appearing on Fox News. He was their biggest crowd draw, biggest, most watched program on Fox News. But they just put out a statement this morning that they are parting ways. And I can't tell you that I am distraught about it. But on to more important matters. You know, we talk a lot about economic growth. What is economic growth? A simple way of putting it is that it is the production of more goods and services. If the country produces more goods and services, then the people should be better off, should enjoy a higher standard of living, assuming, of course, that the proceeds of the goods and services are equitably shared, and that is a whole separate issue altogether. When we don't produce more goods and services, or when we produce less than we did before, then the people are worse off, because that reduced amount of goods and services has to be cut up finer, to share among the people. For a long time, we have not been doing well when it comes to economic growth. Over the last 50 years, and I want you to brace yourself, over the last 50 years, the Jamaican economy has grown by only 11%. And over that same 50 years, the population has grown by 40%. So it means that we only increase our goods and services by 11%, but it has to be shared among a population that is now 40% more. In 32 of those 50 years, we recorded a little bit of growth, sometimes less than 1%. And in 18 of those 50 years, the economy actually shrunk. It got smaller. There are various things that have accounted for our poor growth performance, and we will perhaps touch on those later in the program. But undoubtedly, one of the major causes of our poor growth performance has been the massive debt that the country has been carrying for all these years. When we owe plenty money, we have to service that debt. We have to pay the interest every year, and when it becomes due, we have to pay the principal as well. And when the debt is very high, by the time we take out the money to service the debt, and a separate portion of money to pay the teachers and the nurses and all the public sector workers their salaries, the policemen and so on, there is not much left to spend on the things that would help the economy to grow, like infrastructure, good roads and good port facilities. And importantly, on human development, better education and skill training, so that our labor force can be more efficient and more productive. In addition to all of that, when we borrow so much money, we are gobbling up too much of the money that should be available to businessmen and entrepreneurs for them to access loans to invest and to expand their businesses or to create new ones so that they would be able to produce more goods and services, which is where the economic growth comes from. We have made a big turn for the better. Over the last 10 years, we have been reducing the debt burden so that more money is available to do the things that stimulate growth. More money is available for the private sector to borrow and invest. Because things are looking brighter, businessmen and investors have greater confidence about the future of the country and are more motivated to invest. So it is reasonable to expect that our growth performance will improve, and we have begun to see some signs of that. But is growth all that we require? Is growth the ultimate objective? And is what we have been doing recently, reducing the debt, balancing the budget, and improving our fiscal behavior, are those sufficient to sustain the higher growth performance that we need? Even though we are now able to spend more money on infrastructure, building major highways, for example, is that enough to achieve the 5 to 6% growth levels that have eluded us for the last 50 years? Professor Don Robotham is one of Jamaica's outstanding scholars, a graduate of the University of the West Indies and a former Pro-Vice Chancellor of the university. He's currently Professor of Anthropology and the founding director of the Advanced Research Collaborative of the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. Professor Robotham recently published an article in the Gleaner in which he argues that our focus must not just be on growth, but on development. Because it is through development, this is what he argues, it is through development, not so growth, that the Jamaican people will be more productive, earn better wages, and enjoy a better quality of life. He identified a number of areas to which we need to turn our attention if we are not just to grow, but to develop. And being a social anthropologist, he suggests as well that if we were able to get on a development path, we would be in a better position to deal with some of the major problems bedeviling us, like crime and violence. Prior to this article, Professor Robotham had published 2 articles dealing with our technological gap, pointing out that the production of goods and services is now being driven by technology and innovation like never before, and that if we continue to allow ourselves to be left behind, we would be condemning ourselves to a future of low growth, low wages, and a quality of life far below what many other countries would enjoy. I found Professor Robotham's ideas very interesting, and we decided that this would be the focus of the program today. He will be joining us from New York shortly. I have in studio with me Dr. Damian King, hardly needs an introduction, retired UWI lecturer in economics. We're going to be joined as well by Professor Densil Williams, Pro-Vice Chancellor of the UWI, who will be speaking to us from Antigua, and also by Mr. Dennis Chung, economic analyst, and none of these is any stranger to this program. These are all heavyweights, and appropriately so, because this is a heavyweight issue, and we're going to dive into it as soon as we come back. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're on Irish Jam as well. Is Beauregard around? Bo, are you there?
Good afternoon, Mr. Golden.
What up, my friend?
I'm here. I'm doing great.
How is New York?
New York is warming up. We had some rain over the weekend. Today's in the low 60s. So, we're just waiting until the summer weather actually.
And the low 60s for you is warm.
Yeah, that kind of warm for today.
Yes. You're like a lizard. So how you doing, my friend? You good?
Yes, sir. I'm good. We're just here watching what's going on in Sudan also.
Yes.
We saw that the United States had to evacuate 16,000 nationals.
Yes.
Including citizens and those people traveling, tourists, and from the embassy. And, it's a sad situation happening over there right now. We hopefully that they can quell these violent happenings that are going on.
But that don't sound like the plan. The plan seems to be to left the place as fast as we can and leave them to fight it out.
That's what it looks like. But I'm hoping that the people of Sudan, come to some sort of resolution.
Yes. We have so many important things to do. We must stop this foolishness,
True indeed.
Man, we have our own problems here because we're killing off one another the same way.
Yes, sir.
Not as bad as it was last year, but still not good. But nice to hear you, Bo.
You too, sir.
When you're planning to visit Jamaica?
Soon. Very soon, sir.
You're sure the immigration officer is going to let you in because you've been away so long?
Of course. No, they always let me in.
They always let you in?
Yes.
Well, you are Jamaican to the bone, so what can I tell you?
Of course.
Nice to hear you.
You too, sir.
We're talking today about development. Well, let me put the topic right. Growth or development or both? And if it is to be both, how do we go about that? As I said, we have Dr. Damian King in studio with us. We want to be joined now by Professor Don Robotham. Do we have him online? Professor Don Robotham. Don, are you there? Not yet.
Yeah, I'm here.
You're there, Don. Well, nice to hear you.
Yeah, nice to see you too and hear you, everybody.
And thank you for joining me. Don, I read your article with great interest. Many of my listeners might not have done so. Outline for us in a synopsis. What is your thesis? What's your argument?
Well, first of all, I made this distinction between growth and development. It's not new. In fact, it's very old. It was the argument, say, in the immediate post-war period of people like Myrdal and Kaldor and the early development economists. But basically, the point here is that it's not just a matter of producing more goods and services, which is good, right? But it's really the kind of goods and services that you produce. That's the crux of it, right? And the difference between the advanced developed economies in the global north and economies in the global south is that the economies in the global north, right, have high technology, very advanced research capabilities, which then feeds through into producing a whole range of goods and services, not just goods, but services as well, which have extremely high value added. And therefore, they have a very high level of per capita income, and they continue to prosper at a very high level. And this is not only for individual citizens, but of course for the tax base of the country. So they're able then to provide, welfare services, health services, pensions, all sorts of things, housing, because the tax base is so strong. Right. So this is the general distinction I'm making between growth and development, because I think that if you frame it that way, right, I don't want to make a big fuss over terminology, but if you frame it this way, whatever terminology you use, then we zero in on what is really our problem, which is that we are in a very low technology environment, and not only is our human resources low and our productivity low, but we have no mechanism really in which to commercialize any kind of innovation, high technology development, and move up the value chain. We have no actual mechanism to do this, right? And this is the crux of my point, that we can't do this with a free market. No country has done it with a free market, certainly not Japan, which started it in the 19th century. Not South Korea, not Singapore, not China, and now the United States itself. And indeed, this morning, Britain, soon after this morning, announced a British industrial policy. in which they're going to set up something called Foundation Model to develop sovereign British AI, says Suna, whatever that is, right? So everybody in the developed world, which is already an advanced tech world, is moving in this direction, and we've got to get moving in that direction too. The other point I'd make is that the opportunities are there for us, and there are people in the private sector interested in this, obviously. There's a very interesting interview with Talia Lynn, which I watched, on how to innovate in island grid. Very, very interesting, right? And there was also the meeting in CARICOM with Jaishankar, the Indian external minister, in which he was offering to help us upgrade manufacturing and small and medium enterprises. So that there are possibilities which exist, but we're not taking advantage of it. And this is why when you look at the BOJ GDP predictions for growth, right, it's 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%. After I get over the initial spurt of recovery, it's a 1% scenario because really our technology, we're just not there. We're not there in terms of human resources, and we're not there equally important. It's not just human resources. Equally important, or perhaps even more important, is a mechanism to convert the human resources into actual research and innovation, commercializing the economy. This is really the key link, right? India is interesting because India focused only on the human resources end, right? And the result of India focusing on the human resources end only is that they had large-scale migration of their technology people to the US. So Google and Microsoft today headed by India, people of Indian origin, right? Now India is putting in place the industrial policy component much more strongly, because it's not just human resources, you see. It's also how do you commercialize innovation? That is really a huge part of it. So this is my argument, really, that we need to do this, and we can do it. We're starting from very, very far behind, but we can do it, and I think we need to start moving on it.
Well, Don, I have Damian King in studio with me. I'm going to invite his comments.
Good afternoon, Bruce. Good afternoon, Don. Really great to hear your voice, Don. It's been a long time. And once again, great to hear you sort of articulating very clearly for people, a framework for development. As you pointed out, the issue...
Damon, can I interrupt you? I gather we have Professor Densil Williams on as well. Densil, are you there?
IPM, good afternoon, and very good afternoon to my very distinguished two colleagues, Prof. Robotham and Prof. King.
Good to hear you, Densil. I'm going to come back to you in a short while.
Yes, I'm listening. Good.
Yeah, Damien.
Yes, as Don correctly points out, these are old, long debated issues. The issue of growth versus development is, as Don says, a distinction that has long been made, and it's an important distinction. But one is hard pressed to find examples in history of where growth has taken place in sort of the literal and theoretical sense of just an expansion of what was being done before. Growth is always accompanied by a transformation of the production structure and economic relationships. So I'm not sure that it's worth spending a lot of time emphasizing that distinction,
well,
which I think is widely accepted.
How would you classify Ghana that is growing by 40% a year? Is that development?
It's funny. That's a great example. That's a great example and raises a whole lot of other issues, because it would be a good example of growth without development if that's what happens, if it is sustained.
In the long term.
My point is, unless there is, and Don's point is that unless that transformation takes place, not even the growth is sustainable.
Absolutely. Vietnam is another interesting case, but if I don't mind jumping in, where you have Vietnam is particularly interesting because Vietnam, unlike Ghana, is producing laptops, producing iPhones, or at least about to produce iPhones. But there is very little technology transfer going on in Vietnam. It's really fascinating to see it. Right? So the issue is, how do you get that mechanism, which, if you want, whatever language you use, what they call good, is really a secondary point. But the concept is the thing. The concept. How do you make that move from low value added or just assembly operations or extractive things like you get in Africa, massive extractive sectors in Latin America, Bolivia, and so on? How do you make that move from assembly of low value added extraction to actual innovation in your own economy? I know we can do it, you know. I mean, Jamaica is a unique. We need to, if I have the chance, we can discuss how. Right?
Yeah, Damian, continue developing your point.
Yeah, so here is where I want to build upon Don and diverge from him. I mean, what we are seeing now in Jamaica with our weak technical capacity and our inability to have sophisticated production techniques is a result of a failed formal educational system that is 100 years old. When you look at the educational capacity of and the skills capacity of our labor force, 3/4 of our labor force is unskilled by any definition of skills. So we are now seeing the limits of that. CAPRI's recently launched report pointed out that we now have effectively full employment in Jamaica. So that's the constraint on the economy. The ability to have even economic growth, much less development, with a fully employed labor force, a maxed out labor force that just doesn't have the skills. My concern with Don's, not his framing of the problem, which I think is sound, but with the direction that he thinks we can go and wants us to go, is that when you have a largely uneducated labor force, you don't even have a basis on which a government can come in and, as a result of, a short-term campaign, transform that to any technological skill level that is capable of anything. It represents an expectation of what government is capable of. Well, undoing basically 100 years of a poor educational system.
Well, maybe not a short-term campaign, but isn't it something that we have to begin at some point?
You have to begin at kindergarten. You can't begin with the existing labor force, because one of the benefits of education is that it's the foundation that creates trainability. And if you have a poorly educated labor force in the first place, then you don't even have trainability. How are you going to get somebody who can work with technologically sophisticated equipment when they dropped out of high school in the 9th grade and are not functionally able to read and do arithmetic? When you look at the success rate in CSEC, in mathematics, as a percentage of the cohort, not the pass rate, the cohort, it's something like 12%. So how are you going to make that labor force technically sophisticated?
But well, if what you're saying is we have to draw a line in the sand, the sooner we do that, and the sooner we start determining that the kid who is now 2 years old and is going to be going into early childhood in 2 years, that he's not going to suffer that fate. I get a sense that what Dan is saying is that, look, whether you're talking about doing it over a generation or you're talking about doing it over 10 years, it is a must do, and the sooner you start, the better you're going to reap the benefits, no?
Well, the only way to do it is to do it for the next generation. If you try to give government the permission, never mind not having the resources, but just the permission to try to do it with the existing labor force, then you're exposing the government to failure,
yeah.
and worse, to state capture, to corruption, to incompetence, which might not actually get us further in the direction we want to go.
Let me bring in Densil here. Densil, give me your thoughts.
No, this is a fascinating discussion. You're hearing me well, yes?
Yeah, man.
And I hope your listeners are hearing me. Good. I know my camera is gone, yes. But this is a fascinating discussion, and I really was wondering, now that Damian has spoken, why am I here? because the truth is that a lot of what Damian has said is exactly where I wanted to go. Building on Don's point. Don's point is absolutely valid. That's the first thing I'll say. Absolutely valid that we have to move up the value chain in order for us to reap the benefits of both growth and development. And we don't want to get into that old debate. It's about how we do it now. So the issue that was raised by Damian is fundamental. Our basis of that launch out of that development trajectory that Don is speaking about is too weak. But I will even go further than Damian. So when you look at the numbers, what you're recognizing, we have roughly about 20% of our school leaving cohort that move on to tertiary or post-secondary education. For us to do a lot of the things that Don is speaking about, we're going to have to move from just basic primary, secondary, and preschool to tertiary or post-secondary, because the truth is that primary, secondary, preschool, necessary conditions, but not sufficient. They are necessary to teach the arithmetic and to develop the certain teaching and learning skills, etc. But the higher order skills that you're going to now require to do the kind of transformation that Don is talking about now have to come at the tertiary or the post-secondary level. I've always said to persons, Damian, I've never seen an economist be trained at a secondary school. You have to move post-secondary to get that kind of thing. So what we have to do, I think, PM and colleagues, is that we have to look at how we actually develop the entire education system. So I have heard this general argument before, and persons should know my view on it by now. This idea about developing the education system means that you take from one portion of the system and give it to another. I think that's a very dangerous route to go down. I think what we need to do is to fund education in its entirety, from preschool right up to kindergarten, right up to post-secondary education, and give us a fighting chance, because without that, the truth is that we're not going to get our population to do the kinds of things that Don is talking about that is necessary in order for us to have both growth and development. I saw, for example, the example of the GEM report that talks about a lot of our small and medium-sized businesses, which really don't improve their technology any at all over the last 10 years or so. But then I will give you another piece of frightening evidence. I did some work about 15 years ago on exporters in Jamaica, and one of the questions I asked in that particular piece of work was about the improvement in their products since they launched their businesses. And the majority of companies have not changed their product line or make any improvement to their product for over 30 years. The exact thing that they started with in 30 years are the exact things that they're trying to enter the international market with. No change in labeling, no change in even basic things like packaging, no change in content, nothing. They're just the same thing. And I've said to them, if you don't advance, other people will advance ahead of you, and therefore your products are going to struggle in the international market. Basic things like that. So I'm saying, in order for that advancement to take place, what we have to do is to provide us with a fighting chance by getting more persons properly educated in order for us to operate in this new economy. And I think that is going to be the fundamental thing. So PM, you asked a question about drawing a line in the sand. This is the line that we have to draw now. We have to see education in a different light. We have to have a broader policy for education rather than just talking about taking monies from the tertiary, giving it to secondary and all of that redistributive thing. It's not redistributive. It's funding education in its entirety. And I have some thoughts on how we're doing that as well.
I want to get back to Don. Do we need to take a break? No, we'll take a break now? Yeah, can we just take a break? We'll be back in a short while. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live on Bridge 99 here in Jamaica and on IRIJAM in New York. Today we're talking about growth or development, or should we have both? And we have a fantastic team helping us to understand the issues. Professor Don Robotham, Professor Densil Williams, and Dr. Damian King. Don, I wanted to raise with you, should we be acknowledging that there is a sequencing that cannot be avoided? If we were still talking about a debt burden that gobbled up almost 50% of our budget, and running fiscal deficits every year, squeezing the private sector out of credit, we wouldn't be able to be talking about the things that you are raising. Is it that having got to this vantage point, and we still have a little further way to go, but having got to this point where we have greater flexibility, greater capacity, Are you saying that, look, let's not waste those advantages. Let us focus those on the things that are really transformational and will get us over this technological gap that you're talking about. And taking into account as well the point that Densil and Damian are making. I am not too old to be scared when somebody says, listen, man, don't bother try to fix it in terms of the current cohort. What you need to do is to make sure that, you know, my grandchildren are not condemned to the kind of, obstacles that their parents had to face. Is sequencing something that we should at least acknowledge?
No. Well, yes and no. Primarily no, right? It's a very interesting point. A couple of things on this. We are not the only country in this position, right? There are many, including countries we admire. Costa Rica is in the same position. Dominican Republic is in. Chile is in the same position. And of course, South Africa, right? And with the same complex of especially in South Africa, more than the Latin American countries, but South Africa, very poorly educated labor force, right? So that's number one. This is a battle going across the global South, trying to resolve the difficulty we have, right? The second thing I'd say, it's we can make headway with our existing deficits. This is a mistake. It really is. I understand. I'll be the last person to minimize the difficulties, right? But I'm not into the grandchildren project, Bruce. I think that we can make headway. No. There was a very interesting program. I don't know if you saw it. There was an interview with Talia Lynn around Island Grill and her sort of passing the baton to a new generation, right? It was discussing how she plans to transform Island Grill. And it's very interesting that she has her son as what his title is the Chief Innovation Officer. And she spoke at length about how they had trained their staff, how they had got progress and buy-in from their staff. Listen, this thing is very, very difficult, right? But there are firms which are doing it with a very weak labor force we have. And one of the things I wanted, in fact, Damian, forgive me, because I suggested this to a project which you may know about, which Doug Rain and Hendricks are putting together on training. I suggested that they should hire CAPRI to follow this through, to follow this learning training process through, to see what parts worked and what parts didn't work and why, right, and how to improve them. So I take the point that we have a horrible, weak education system, right? But yes, the grandchildren project, I understand that side of it, right? But here and now, let me give you a concrete example, if I may. And I agree that we're talking about labor force as well as the formal system. Just looking at the formal system, they're talking about on-the-job training now. That's the formal system. If you compared the CSEC pass rate in math to the GSAT pass rate in math, I don't know what to call it, PEP now. They change it every now and then. I think it's PEP now, right? But if you compare the PEP pass rate to the CSC pass rate in math, the PEP pass rate is higher than the CSC pass rate. This is very interesting, right? So that what we are saying, the rickety education system we have now can actually supply a higher pass rate in math at the 11 and 12-year-old level than the high school system can provide at the 16 and 17 level. In other words, there's some relapse going on in the 7 to 9 grades, right? In which people are not sustained in the case, you understand that the parents put out heaven and earth to pass PEP and whatever, and then they drop their hands. So there's a downturn in between 7 and 9, right? Now, this can be addressed. The schools which do well in CSEC, whatever they're calling it now, are the schools which have a strong 7 to 9 My general point on this, Bruce and Damian and Densil, and I take the point you're making, is that we need a more granular, a more careful, detailed analysis of our deficits. We need to look at training programs which have worked. There are some on-the-job training programs, usually at the private sector level. And by the way, I am not talking about some huge state-led effort in a simple sense. No. That's not at all what I have in mind. I'm talking about a combined state-private sector effort, where in fact it's led by the private sector and supported by the state. So that if Taylor Lynn and Island Grill are having results in their training programs and so on, then the state should back it up and help to extend it and generalize it. Right, and if Mussins is having progress in their program, then likewise, so that it's not a state-led thing, right? It's something which a much more state-private sector combo, in which in many cases it will be the private sector which is leading with the existing weak, poorly educated labor force. I am quite sure that we can make much better progress while we do the longer-term sort of grandchildren project. We do that, but we need some short-term things, and we can get them, but we need a more granular, careful analysis of exactly what is going on at the detailed level, where people have made and seem to have had some success in some of their training programs. This is the approach that I'm taking.
Yes.
Well, I'm anxious to ask Damian to respond, but we have Dennis Chung on the line. Dennis, are you there?
Yes, hi. How are you doing, Prime Minister?
I'm good. Tell me, how do we transition from growth to development? I don't know how much of the discussion you have heard, but I found it very stimulating.
Yeah, I did read Mr. Robotham's articles, and I did hear his comments just now, and I agree with many of the things that he has said, and I agree that we do have a technology situation, or more, I would more say a productivity situation. Since 1972, we've seen labor productivity fall in this country every single year except for about 3 or 4 years. They may will know more about the numbers. And that I've always maintained is a primary challenge that we face. So the question is, why do we have a productivity issue, right? And how do we solve that?
Didn't Damian suggest certainly one of the reasons why if only 12% of our high school kids are passing maths?
Right.
How productive can they be?
Exactly. So the question that Don spoke about just now, why is it that when children get to high school, they actually don't do as well as PEP? And the answer for me is simple. I mean, we have a problem of how we incentivize labor in this country. And in 2013, you'll recall, when the IMF did the agreement, one of the main things that they said is that unless we have proper labor market reform, this country is not going anywhere. And we have not had proper labor market reform. We still have a situation where, first of all, teachers at the high school level in particular are not being incentivized based on performance. We have a situation where, and I can speak in the private sector, you catch a man stealing on camera and the employer loses, even with that, because of some procedural issue, right? How can we, as a country, move forward and build the productive capacity of people if we are being hamstrung by the bureaucracy, right, and the fact that we don't have proper labor market laws in place? So, I mean, I hear the argument that we have to protect people, and I agree, we need to protect people. But we don't have to do it in such a way that it kills productivity, because what we're doing, and I made this point years ago, that we're going to find ourselves in the situation that we do today, because what we think about many times when we think about labor is short term. We don't think about long term. And I can tell you, if we continue on the same path, people are going to get poorer and poorer, and productivity is going to continue to decline. And unless we can find a way to improve productivity, which includes proper labor market reform. So, the pockets of what the island grills are doing and all of that, those are unique situations because they chose to invest more, right? Because the labor that's coming in from outside is not prepared, right? So they chose to do that. For us to have it on a wide scale, right, it means that fiscal policy needs to take care of that. And that is what we have not done, and we refuse to do as a country. So we have the Jamaica Productivity Center in Jamaica, but how many people know about that? That's not leading anything, right? We talk about increases that we're giving to public sector or whoever. I can guarantee you that, and as I said in 2010, when Shaw was the Minister of Finance at the time, he gave the teachers 10%. And I said, you know what? In a year's time, they're going to be worse off than they were, right? Because we keep thinking that the way to improve people's lives is to just throw more money at them now and again, right? We don't deal with labor market reform. And that labor market reform has caused us to have a situation where a lot of the labor is on contract. There's no pension, there's no health.
But Dennis,
people find a way to get around it.
Before you even start to reform the labor, what I understand Damian to be saying is that if the labor force can't pass maths, there's a very sharp limit to what you can do with that labor in terms of productivity.
Yeah, but the reason why it can't
you can reform it all you want. I'm not going to be able to cope in a technological world.
And it's going to get worse and worse. But the reason why they can't pass maths is because we don't have the proper incentive in place for productivity to take place.
All right. Well,
so what is the incentive for someone to get their students to get 80 or 90% of their students passing math? There's none.
Damian, let me hear you.
So again, we are all agreed with John's basic premise that the skills level and the technological sophistication of the labor force is too weak to transform the standard of living in Jamaica. I want to push back, Don, on your expectation. I pushed back early on your expectation that the government can accomplish this. I mean, at some point, you argued that the government should technically upskill workers in the informal sector. I don't know by what means government can upskill 500,000 informal workers, but you seem now to be shifting that responsibility to the private sector. And my pushback on that is that the reason why the private sector has not been willing to throw a lot of resources at that in the past still pertains. That, as you would appreciate, a private sector company has no means of ensuring that that company gets the return to any investment in on-the-job training that it makes. So there's a limit to how much we can expect the private sector in general to take on this task.
So, PM, can I intervene as well?
Yeah, Densil. And in commenting, let me just plant a seed in your brain and you give me an idea on it. Mm-hmm. When I go to Barbados, I'm amazed at how, and it's quite obvious, their educational level is higher than ours. I mean, the taxi driver speaks perfect English. And it seems to me that he calculates very quickly.
For 250 years, it has been better than ours.
But they struggle as well with the same things that Don is identifying as our problems here.
Yes. Okay. Very good. So let me just make a few quick points. One, so Damian mentioned the issue of separating the cohort from the pass rate, and I think that's a very powerful point, because when Don spoke about the people in PEP who are able to have a higher pass rate than the people who go to CSEC. That's true in terms of the pass rate. But Don, when you look at the cohort of people doing PEP and those who pass mathematics, if you were to take the cohort in general, what you're seeing is a very small portion. Still, the cohort that's supposed to do PEP is still a very small portion, and that small portion that does so well in mathematics. If you look at the demographics of that portion, it is people who are at a more privileged level, who can invest in the after school extracurricular extra lesson activities and Saturday classes and Sunday classes and all those kinds of things. The ordinary kid is not able to get that. The ordinary kid is not able. I have, for example, fortunately for me in this discussion, my daughter is now doing PEP. And I looked at her ability test just a few weeks ago. And when I looked at the question, I said to her, were you able to do some of this? She said it was easy. But when I checked other kids from other places, they were not able to do it. And the major reason, my daughter does extra lessons and all of those kinds of things, okay? But the ordinary child is not able to do that. So they find it a struggle to get this done. So what we're saying is that if you're going to make this transformation, it has to be broad-based. So you have to, and that is where now I agree with Don that the state can come in order to support this at a lower level. So yes, we can have everybody, not because somebody's parents have the ability to finance their education, they get a better education than the others. And that's why we're calling for a total fix of the education system from the state. So you talk about Barbados, PM. That was one of the issues with Barbados. Barbados said, listen to me, and I'm not advocating, no, I want the listeners and everyone to be clear, I'm not advocating for free education. But what Barbados has said is that, listen, no child will be left behind, and we're going to find the means necessary to make sure that everybody goes to university, everybody goes to this college, etc., that they can have that thing. And that's why you'll find the ordinary taxi driver in Barbados can engage you when they pick you from the airport in a conversation about politics, about regionalism, about all of these kinds of things, because their level of education that they get, most of it is free in one sense, but the quality of that is also significant.
Yeah, but the point I was making, Dan, is that they seem, sorry, Densil, they seem to be facing the same challenges that we are facing. Although we are nowhere near their level of educational attainment.
I'm exactly coming to that, because the second point that that Don made that I would want to also spend some time on, and it is the example with Island Grill and those kinds of places as well. It is true that companies like Island Grill and stuff will be invested in training and stuff, but what I think we're getting at is, if you're going to get to that higher level on the value chain, the Island Grills of this world is not going to bring us to that level. So they can do some of the things, yes, but what we need is a higher level. No, this is where the Caribbean, in a sense, is also struggling, because what we now need to see is a higher level of sophistication in terms of that technological transfer. And this is where now what you need to see is greater investment done, Damian, Dennis, and PM, in terms of the tertiary that is going to deal with the knowledge creation that you can now disseminate to the lower levels. So because what you find is that our spend on research and development is extremely weak. So we don't have a lot of investment that is going to be pumped in our university to do research and development. And then when the output comes from those, we don't translate that now to the bottom of the pie, where we can actually use that now to inform the kind of pedagogy that we're giving to those students. So that is the missing link, because a lot of the funding that we're getting at the tertiary level, for example, is going into basic teaching and learning. And Don made a point, for example, in one of his articles, that, for example, the University of the West Indies should be doing more applied research linked to the Scientific Research Council. But the truth is that the University of the West Indies is literally barely paying salaries, so they don't have money to invest into research and development. So this is where now the nexus comes between both private sector, academia, and government to say how you use fiscal policy to incentivize private sector to invest in the research at the higher level, so that that research now can return itself and find itself back into the classroom at the lower level to build up the capacity that you need. And that's the kind of things that we need to talk about now, how we bring that to all of those together.
Don, what are we doing? Are we trampling recklessly over your ideas?
I think Don is muted. Don, you're muted.
I think maybe I'm not sufficiently clear, which is often the case, right? I understand what, how would I say? I understand this sort of, I would call it cautious pessimism of Damian and Densil. Or realism, perhaps, is a better, fairer word, right? I understand this, right? And I am not at all deluded to think that all of a sudden Jamaica is going to become like Estonia or Denmark. This is absurd, right? We are light years from anything like that.
Yes.
Okay. Having said that, though, 2 points. First of all, it's not just a matter of education and training. We have to be careful on this. Vietnam has done marvelous things with human resource development, but it has a problem of technology transfer, right? You can educate the daylights out of your labor force. If you don't have the mechanisms to commercialize that in a system of innovation in production, then what happens, of course, is what has happened to India. People migrate to California, right? And the benefits go to Microsoft and Google, right? education is a crucial component, but it is only one part of it. That's number one. Number two, though, is a more important point in a way. We have to distinguish between the longer term things which Damian and Densil are talking about, and also what Dennis is speaking about, all of which I agree with. I don't have a problem with that, right? The longer term things are absolutely true. There's no contesting that. And the short term immediate things in which we can get some limited gains. What I am seeking at the moment is limited gains, okay? I think that if we get an uptick in limited gains, we have something to build on. Yes. And I heard, for example, Doug Rain told me about this idea that himself and Butch Hendrickson and Glenn Christian have about launching a significant skills training program. This is absolutely important, notwithstanding the problems that Damian speaks of, which are real, that people are afraid that they will poach and all of that, right? Notwithstanding that, there are people who are interested and are actually putting their money where their mouth is. And what I'm saying is that there is more to be gained there in these apparently small and minor programs, right? There's more to be gained there than we realize. And what we really need to do is do an audit of all of these programs like this and see if we can bring them together and incentivize and finance them with as much help we can from the public sector and generalize them and also research them. I really think CAPRI and others, not just CAPRI, should try and follow these programs in some detail, right? We need to get to the bottom of why it is. And I take Densil's point. Of course, my children went through the same thing. You pack them up with private lessons and so on, right? And of course, they do better than children from working class backgrounds. But they also relapse, by the way. It's not only the working class kids relapse. Middle class kids also relapse between 7 to 9, right? So this is it's an interesting problem. We need to put some energy and effort in dealing with the 7 to 9 relapse problem. If we could sustain the PEP level math pass, right, into CSEC, we would probably get a 15 to 20% improvement in math passes at the CSEC level. That would be a tremendous gain. So what I'm saying is, yes, we need the grandchildren approach, a long-term approach and all of that. I agree with that totally. But we also look more carefully at gains which can be made in the short term. And there are people trying, notwithstanding the obstacles which are immense, right? But these efforts are isolated and individual firms and so on. We need to bring them together, give them resources, encourage them, generalize them, and research them and learn the lessons from them, right? And build on these, because, it's one basket full cocoa, I guess is what I'm talking about here, right? While at the same time, we pursue the longer-term objectives that Damian and Densil were absolutely correct, and Dennis is absolutely correct. I have no quarrel with that. And I repeat, yeah, I'm very interested, and other countries are trying it. The idea of upskilling the informal sector is an extremely interesting project, right? And other countries are trying it. It has to be tried. It's a very complicated thing, but it's interesting and fascinating. But if you take it in bite-sized chunks, So all I'm saying is this. There are more things going on in our system than we actually realize. And if we take those things and we look at them, not all of them are successes. Many of them have failures in it, and we need to be realistic and so on. But if we follow them carefully, look on what works, look on what doesn't work, look at why. There was a case, a person was telling me on Twitter, guy who was a firm, actually sympathetic to the JLP government guy, not in government, but private sector guy, a small firm. And he was saying he had this tremendous problem with training his labor force. But he insisted and insisted and insisted. And eventually, some of his most recalcitrant workers decided, yes, they would accept the training because he threatened them with dismissal. That they said, okay, we'll do the training. And they actually mastered it.
Don, we're up on the 1 o'clock break. Can you bear with me?
Sorry. But you get the drift. Yeah,
bear with me. We'll be back in a short while. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're talking today about growth, development, or both. We just heard from Professor Don Robotham. Densil Williams is going to have to leave us shortly, but before I bring him back in, Damian, is there any country that has been or is in a comparable situation to us with economic challenges, with the problem of, deficit in education and so on, that either has found a way or is finding the way? I tend to look for comfort in people who have done the thing right and so on, so we don't waste time.
Oh, there are many examples. Chile used to be one of the poorest economies in Latin America 50 years ago. It is now the richest economy in Latin America. Ireland was the poorest country in Europe. In the EU, it is now the wealthiest. Everybody knows about Singapore, Costa Rica. Lots of countries have made a transformation.
Denzel?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, those are very good examples as well, Damian. But they also do some of the things that we're talking about. There's a very interesting case, Don and Damian, on Costa Rica, written by one of Harvard professor, Deborah Spa. Yeah, about how Intel went to Costa Rica, and that case is still alive and well to show you how the transformation took place, especially with science and mathematics and all those things that the entire state threw their weight behind. So there are examples of those. But as I prepare to leave, I mean, I'm sorry that I have to leave this very fascinating discussion. But in a sense, I understand where Don is going. It's not an either or project. It's an and project. Yeah, and the project simply says that there are short-term things that need to be done now, and there are long-term things that also need to be done. Because if you only do the short-term and then you get a hype or a nice sensation about it, but the structural things which Damian and I are speaking about are not being addressed, then that short-term thing is going to last only, as it says, in the short term, and we will come back here in 25 years talking about the exact same thing. So what we really need to do, because Don is absolutely correct, you need something to give people the momentum, just give them the hope that this can happen, and that's where the short-term projects come in. Yes, so the things like what the Island Grill is doing, or some of the STEM things that Butch and Dougie and Glenn and those guys are doing. Those are important things as a kind of a kickstart to get things going, and that people can see hope. You have to let people can feel hope, and then they can believe in a longer term vision. So it is important to have it as not a either or, but an and issue going forward. And the final thing I will say, there are some important areas that we can now start these kind of transformational projects in the short term. The creative industry is a fascinating area. I mean, when you look at what the young men are doing with Carnival in Jamaica, for example, Carnival is not a big thing in Jamaica, and now it's almost rivaling Trinidad Carnival. Why? Because we see the creative energy starting to come out. People from all over the world looking forward to Jamaica Carnival. That's just one aspect of the creative industries. We're creative in food as well. We can look at all how we do things in terms of food, in terms of our music, etc. We have also the business process outsourcing sector. Now we need to say, how do we actually upskill our people to move from merely a call center to a kind of a knowledge process outsourcing? We have universities that are teaching people, law, and we're teaching people architectural design, we're teaching people accounting, etc. How can we do kind of outsourcing in those kinds of areas that is going up the value chain? These are short-term things that we can do. And the final thing is also the blue economy. What are we doing with our ocean resources? How are we actually getting our people to look at the short-term gains that we can get from actually doing entrepreneurship in terms of ocean resources, coastal resources, etc.? We are a country with a lot of ocean space. How are we using that to actually deal with things like ocean tourism and all those kinds of things? So the blue economy is also another important space that we also have to look at in the short term to do some of the things that Don's talking about. But fundamentally, the structural things that people like Damian and myself, and I'm not saying that Don not talking about that as well, because clearly from his articles, those are critical issues. How we now also address those structural issues. And that is where we need to have both long-term planning and short-term planning in order to get things going.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Let me ask Dennis. One of the points that Don made in his articles is he was referring to my words, not his, a kind of structural misalignment within the government apparatus, and he spoke about agencies of government that seem to be each of them following their own routine when their mandate is so linked to each other that there really need to be greater coordination, greater synergies between them. He spoke about that too in terms of our research and development activities. I mean, I don't know, for example, if the Scientific Research Council has the faintest clue as to what is happening on the Mona campus, or whether they know what is happening down at the Bodils Agricultural Station. What's your view on this, Dennis?
I totally agree with that. One of the things I've been saying is that it seems as if when we set up these agencies, we don't have an overall objective as to where we want to go as a country. So we have HEART, for example, and we know that we want to get to growth, for example, of 5% a year. And we know that we're going to need 100 engineers to get to 5% a year. But what do we produce from HEART? Hairdressers and barbers, right? So there's no linkage between the Scientific Research Council. There's no linkage between HEART and universities with the PIOJ. So the PIOJ is busy making projections and plans as the amount of growth that we need, but then we don't say, well, what do we need to get this growth? How many engineers do we need? Is it engineers that we need? Where's our competitive advantage as a country? What do we need? What are resources that we need, right? And then drill that down to the SRC, drill that down to HEART, drill that down to university.
Somebody would retort that, that we're not producing them, it's just we can't keep them.
Well, and that's the other point. So therefore, it comes back to the point that Don made. And I'm very happy you said it, that we don't necessarily need, higher skill sets to produce a lot more than we're producing now. Because at the end of the day, and Densil's right, we have carnival and with that sort of thing. But what happens is that even with the things that we're doing and we're doing well, the productivity levels of the capital we're employing is very low. And that's the issue. The productivity levels of the labor that we're employing. So maybe if we were to take those same people that are doing carnival here and put them in another country with policies that are going to encourage more productivity, instead of earning $1 billion, they might be earning $2 billion. And that is the issue that we face, because the challenge that we face, and it shows in our exchange rate, is that relative to other countries, so if on an absolute point of view, we might celebrate that we're making $100. But when you look at relative to other countries, we are not getting the same level of return on investment. And I give you two examples, two very short-term things that can happen, right? That's just a will that needs to do it. Number one of the quickest ways, and I speak as a simple accountant, not an economist, one of the quickest ways to improve standard of living in this country is to put a good public transportation system in place. Because what it means that people can be more productive because they don't have to feel like they go through World War II when they go to work, right? It means that people can be more productive because they don't have to think about how their children are going to be picked up. It means they can be more productive because I did a small analysis a few years ago that shows that in traffic alone, we're losing about $160 billion a year in productive hours, just in traffic alone, right? It means also that people can have a higher standard of living because one of the first things they don't have to think about when they leave school is how can I buy a car and be saddled with car payment so that can go into something else, I mean, when you go to New York, you don't jump on private transportation, right? The second thing, though, is that just a small segment that we can look at. So we say Montego Bay is our tourist capital, right? But Montego Bay is a dump. And if you look at just the strip alone, where people are getting rooms for $200 and something a night, there's such a demand for Jamaica. If we were to make that into a real attractive area and places that people want to go to, right? Just by policy, just by saying we're not going to allow people to just sell on the sidewalks like that and destroy the neighborhood. we could be making $500 a night per room instead of 200 and something. Those are some of the short-term things that can happen without even talking about the education system, which Densil and Damian spoke about so well.
Let me ask Damian this. Back to the point that I raised.
Just before you go, I have to run out now. So, but thank you very much. I really look forward to getting the recording for this. Okay.
Yeah, Densil, thank you so much. I appreciate
bye-bye, colleagues. Bye-bye. Good.
Damian, has CAPRI done any work on the kind of silo culture within government's administrative structure?
No, we haven't done anything on the structure of government. But I just want to use the opportunity to repeat one of the most succinct and effective quotes I've come across recently on development, and it takes off precisely from the point that Dennis was making. It said that a developed country is not one in which a rich country is not one in which the poor have cars. It is one in which the rich take public transportation.
I follow you.
And this example of New York exactly captures that.
Yeah. Don,
I don't know. New York subways are. A lot could be said about the decline of infrastructure in the United States. That's for sure. I wouldn't recommend New York subways to anybody. But nonetheless.
Yeah, but when I'm in New York, I take the subway, okay?
Don,
better than our system, I grant.
Don, I opened the discussion very excited. I don't want to close the program in any state of bewilderment. Where are we? Where are we in terms of even coming to some kind of general consensus as to where to go? The reason why I keep raising this, you see, is because I think we have, and there's a window open to us now that has not been open to us for 50 years. And I want to make sure, taking the very important points that you have made, taking those into account, I want to make sure that we don't waste this window.
Yeah. First of all, I think that one of the things that your program brings out to me that is this is not an occasion for political partisanship. Right? You have on your program people who have all sorts of different political outlooks. This is really important, right? We all have our political preferences, whatever.
I had Peter Phillips on last week.
Yeah, this is not when these ideas, I first put these ideas to Floyd Green when he was Minister of Agriculture. And I don't remember, I'm not saying I caused it, but then Floyd spoke about reviving borders, right? And research as a central part of the ministry's agenda, right? So I don't care whether the PNP does it. I mean, it would be nice if the PNP does it, but they don't want to do it, that's their problem, right? But or the JLP does it, or whoever does it. I think we need to look at this program. We need to unlock all of these sort of political dead ends, right, and the ideological dead ends, and really look at the issues in a fresh way, in a pragmatic way. I am of the view, right, and I will say this openly, that in the past, I have been too dogmatic and too doctrinaire, right? And I've learned to be a lot more pragmatic about what works and how to approach things. Right? Therefore, I think it's extremely important not to think in narrow ideological terms and to look for the short-term gains, right? Without neglecting the long-term structural things. Really can't do that. Densil's absolutely right, and Damian is right, right? But we really need some short-term gains. And that needs some support from the public sector, but a reconfigured public sector, as Dennis and others, everybody sees this, right? And one last point, my goal is, I'm very ambitious on this damn thing, I mean, Chile is no great success. Costa Rica is no great success, as far as I'm concerned, right? The big successes are in Asia, Singapore, South Korea, Japan. You see Indonesia, Malaysia, very interesting case, right? Vietnam, a little bit, not so much, right? But in Latin America and the Caribbean, yeah, they have upgraded a little bit, but nothing critical. Chile is struggling with this thing. If you look at the Harvard Complexity Index, Chile did quite poorly on this. even though they're upgrading and they're trying. Costa Rica too is trying, right? But hasn't really made any significant breakthrough on a sustainable basis. Has not. Dominican Republic, same thing. Panama, same thing, right? The only success cases of this have been in Asia, right? Only Asia this has happened. Singapore, South Korea, Japan earlier, China, and now Malaysia and so on. And it's quite clear from those examples, you've got to tackle the structural long-term things, but you also got to get some short-term victories, right? And this we can do if we look at the thing in an open mind, right? Try to be inclusive, bring everybody on board. Forget all the ideological blah 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 and the political.
Well, I don't want you to forget the ideological thing yet, because I wanted to put to Damian a point you made, that the neoliberal Washington consensus stifles the kind of flexibility that countries need to be able to respond to the challenges now of doing the things that can put them on the technological track. Damian, what's your view?
Well, I don't want to answer.
And as a matter of fact, Don even went down to say that Biden certainly isn't following what Washington is telling us to do.
And it won't work out for them either. But before I do that, I actually want to address the earlier point about where we are at this point in the discussion, which I think has been quite instructive, not just to the listeners, but certainly to me. All the participants in this discussion agree that there is a technical inadequacy in the labor force that is holding back the country, and without addressing that, there is we may get some marginal growth and development here and there, but we're not going to go very far. We're also in agreement that this is the outcome of 3, 4, 5 generations of inadequacy of the formal educational system. And so the Grandchildren Project has to begin now, transforming education from the kindergarten level through elementary, through the high school, so that this problem gradually gets solved over time. But Don's point can be framed in the following way. Given the labor force that we have now, are we satisfied that we have exhausted all of the possible ways of increasing their productivity by marginal interventions all over the place? And if you frame it in that way, the answer is no, we can't be satisfied.
Well, exactly.
We clearly can do better than we are doing. And the proof of that,
can we do both?
Is that there's no concerted effort to do what Don is suggesting. So once we come out of the framework that by itself is going to be transformational, then we're all in agreement. And to cap it off with your point that having been successful over the last 10 years in an exercise of fiscal responsibility, which is unprecedented in the developed world, in certainly in terms of my knowledge, what Jamaica has accomplished, we now have some fiscal room. And that's the window of opportunity. We now have some fiscal room to start to look at the kind of interventions that Don is referring to. So I think that sort of encapsulates what we have discussed.
Do we run the risk, Don, of, perhaps I better bring Dennis in here, do we run the risk of spending the resources that we now have better access to, scattering it up all over the place as we have done? We're trying to see if we can deal with the person in the workforce who can barely read and write, while at the same time we're trying to make sure that his son, who is now about to enter basic school, doesn't suffer the same fate that he though at some point we have to tell us, we have to take some hard decision and decide where that extra fiscal space is going to go.
Yeah, I think that we've started to do that. I don't think that we've started to do it enough. So, for example, if you listen to the Minister of Finance, he spoke to the fact that about how we need to start using the money and resisted putting more money into just welfare, right? So we've started to do that. We haven't done it enough, but we do run that risk, as you said, PM, of squandering this cushion that we have now. But I think it has started. I mean, if you listen to, and this is what I like about last budget debate, there was a lot of emphasis coming on infrastructure development. There's a lot of emphasis talking about, not just squandering our money, not just relaxing the fiscal rules, because crisis will always arise. We have one this year, we're going to have one next year also. I don't think we went far enough. I'd have loved to I've heard us talk more about like our public transportation system. I think is number one that can help us. But I think we've started that road, and I think discussions like these, certainly what Don has written, can actually be the catalyst for actually more.
It seems to me though that I don't want us to shy away from it, because we can't do all things though. It seems to me that we need a vision, we need a conversation that mobilizes people around the vision to say, now look, for the next 10, 15 years, this is the priority.
Yeah.
Now, one of my visits to Cuba, I was talking to some people about their educational program, which at that time, I don't know about now, but certainly at that time was vastly superior to ours in terms of their outcomes. And a teacher explained to me the philosophy. He said, look, we were under pressure. We were under sanctions. We couldn't build a whole heap of schools all over the place. We took a clear decision. We're going to make sure that every student has access to a well-trained teacher. Yeah. So the class may be held under a mango tree, but we're going to make sure that you have the best possible teacher there teaching you under that mango tree. And the point I'm making is that at some point, our political leaders, and they're going to have to be encouraged, to do this, because some of this is not necessarily politically sexy. But at some point, we're going to have to say, now, look, if we want to move from fiscal stability to not just growth, but to development, so that people can enjoy a better quality of life, there may be different routes to get there, but in our circumstance, given the resources that we have access to, our best approach is going to be the following. This is the priority. Now, at that point, you can get into a quarrel with Don Robotham if you want as to whether his ideas in terms of the priorities are right, or whether you take Damian's position and say, now listen, this is not going to happen this side of 2040 or 2070, because what we're doing is making sure we produce a new generation of Jamaicans that are going to be technologically savvy, going to be efficient and productive. So I'll be dead and gone by then, but at least Jamaica will be on a path that I had hoped in my lifetime. And whatever. Some tough decisions have to be made. No? Am I making sense, Don?
Yeah, I think the vision is a key thing. That's basically what I've been trying to provide, right? Not the details. What do I know about business? I know nothing about business, really, right? But I have some ideas on the academic side, and that's what I think is a very important start. We can debate the details and the emphases, absolutely, right? And I don't have the idea that what I'm saying is absolutely the solution to everything, right? It's not. It's just some ideas which I'm trying to put out there, which I hope other people will take up, right, and put flesh on the bones. But I do think it's crucial. And let me emphasize, I am much more ambitious, maybe fantasy level ambition, because what the goal is in my mind, when I look at the East Asian experience and generally Asian experience, the goal is not just diversifying our production system, and the goal is not just improving our labor force and upskilling them technically and blah, 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 nor is it just to a Costa Rica or a Chile. Our goal has to be higher than that, right? Our vision has to be higher than that. And then we'll understand the steps that we have to take. The vision is of a country which has deep, innovative research capacity. If you have that deep capacity, like what exists in the global north, right, then you will get your productivity across the board. Then you'll get your diversity. Then you'll be able to adapt to new innovations. Then you will yourself originate the innovations and not just be a technology taker, but a technology maker. That's the kind of, it's a very grand vision, a grant, right? And we are light years from it now, but that's what I have in my head. And I think we can do it in our own unique and distinctive way, because one of the things, we're not going to be a Denmark, okay? And we're not going to be a Sweden, okay? But there are certain things that we will be even better than they are technologically. If Sweden can invent Tetra Paks and all this fancy packaging, which in the orange juice and the milk and so on, we can do our own invention. But Sweden is only able to do that because of the deep research capacity in Sweden, right? So it's not just a matter of improving our training systems, but also getting a whole research and innovation culture embedded in our society, embedded in our private sector, and embedded in our public sector, in our academic institutions, right? So this really is a very, very ambitious thing. But this is where the vision that I have.
Up on a time signal again. Bear with me one more time. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're talking about growth and development, or both growth and development. How do we proceed? Dennis suggests that, with the space that we have now, the opportunities that we now have, you have to focus on things like transportation. Dan is saying, hey, you have to retrofit the workforce, and you have to back that up with some serious attention to research and development and better coordination. Damian is saying, hey, things gone so bad, you better just draw a line and make sure that them that coming up now don't fall into the same rut that. I know I'm being unfair to all of you. If I were the Prime Minister today, Damian King, what do I do? Do I flip a coin? Do I draw some straws? If I were to want to decide, now look, I can't do all of them things with a man telling me about. But I really want to see this country get with it in terms of where the world is going. And in order to get there in the shortest possible time and in the most effective way, this is what I'm going to do. What do I do?
Okay, well, the first thing is to recognize what we have done already, which is tremendous. I mentioned the improvement in fiscal management. No other country that I'm aware of has cut its public debt in half, coming from 150% almost, without reneging on principle. Inflation. We now are in a situation where we think 10% inflation is high. Okay? 10, 20, 30 years ago, 10% inflation would have been an achievement. Okay? The average was 20-odd%. We have done a whole lot of, with infrastructure. So all of these are platform, economic climate improvements, the dividends of which are still to come. But there are some others, one of which we're talking about here, which is fundamental to even all of those is the productive capacity of the labor force, and that comes down to education and skills. So this is the right conversation to be having. And it has to be started by transforming. The big advantage that the government has with education is that in all other spheres of public policy, it is reduced to incentivizing and nudging. The government cannot increase production because the government doesn't produce. But the government controls the entire educational system. So whatever it decides goes. It needs to start deciding to put more resources and better resources and better thinking into education, starting from the elementary school level, and realizing that the school compound can be an enclave from the social and economic and security issues outside of the school. Dennis was right to mention public transportation. There's probably no single thing that you can do that is more impactful on productivity. And the last one, which everybody knows about, is the situation with crime and security in the country. Those are the areas that should take some focus now.
Yeah, well, again, let me
My
not.
approach is different. I see, sorry.
I'm sure.
One of the frightening things, though, and Dan mentioned it in his piece, is that the damn technological wheel is spinning so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, the other day, for example, we thought that BPO was what the garment sector was for us back in the 1980s. And, you know, this was gobbling up a lot of the high school kids, and we were trying to make sure that they come out speaking good English because that was the language of communication for BPOs. And over the last couple of days now, we've been seeing in the papers serious concern being expressed that artificial intelligence is out to make the whole BPO thing redundant. How do you... Catching up is one thing, but, you know, you may spend a lot of time and resources catching up in terms of your technology, and suddenly find that the technology you have invested so much in getting up to, that's not where the market is again. How do you cope with that?
Well, this is the so-called problem of the difference between a technology taker and a technology maker, right? Chile and Costa Rica, Vietnam, all of these places are technology takers like us, right? They're doing better than us by far, right? But the fact of the matter is that they're very vulnerable to what you just spoke about, because they have not, Costa Rica to some degree, Chile to some degree, but they have not really made any breakthrough in terms of their own innate scientific research innovation capability. Right? Nobody's saying, oh, look at this marvelous new idea product coming out of Chile. No. Chile is a place which makes copper and processes copper more than Zambia does, right? So it gets more value added, right? But, you know, they make nice wines and so on. But, you know, they're not on the cutting edge of, let's say, green technology, like, say, Denmark would be, because they don't have the research capacity of Denmark. So we have to understand that we have to begin this process of developing our own research innovative capacity. In the short run, which you spoke about, Bruce, my advice for what it's worth would be, right, that I would take the Taylor Lynns and the Hendricksons and the Orains and the Christians of this world and get them into a room and say, now let me hear what you are doing and what you plan to do. Because my focus, I'm not neglecting the structural, long-term, formal education system and all of that stuff, right? And, you know, there's a Patterson report, and before that there's that report, and before there's another report, and there are reports on top of reports on top of reports, right? So I advocate a different approach, which is a more pragmatic approach. Let us look at what is happening on the ground now, right? And let's see if we can enhance those efforts now. Let's see if we can incentivize those now for the next 3-4 years while we get all the long-term ducks in a row and all of that stuff, right? Because we have always followed the structural thing and done these massive reports, right? But at the end of the day, we have gained little from it. And my feeling is the reason why we have gained little from them is because we really haven't found a way to maximize on the short-term, immediate bridges to the long term, right? So it's not a matter of ignoring the long term, but to understand better. But actually, the long term is composed of a whole pile of short terms connected organically. So we've got to move.
But we haven't always done them. We haven't always done them, Donna. I'm saying we haven't always done them. Up until 10 years ago, we were one of the most indebted countries in the world. We owed 150% of GDP. We were one of the countries with the highest inflation in the world. So we haven't always done these things.
No. I'm talking about, okay, this is where we are now. I'm not debating that. Okay. You know, to tell the truth, I'm not debating. I have zero interest in debating neoliberalism, I have to tell you. I have absolutely no interest in it whatsoever. Right?
We're not debating neoliberalism. We're debating the importance of infrastructure. We're debating the importance of good fiscal management.
All of that. I agree with all of that. So I give you all those points. So I'm not worried about that. What I'm concerned with is what do we do now, and what is the priority now? And my idea is there are things currently. I don't want to romanticize them and make them out to be some panacea, which they are not.
Yeah, but Don,
right?
Don, you speak of Thaler, you speak of Glenn Christian, Butch Hendrickson, Doug Rain, and so on. Question that I would ask is, and I'd love to hear Dennis on this. Why are there so few of those? Why are we so lethargic when it comes to those things? Why is it that is when I go abroad, I see all the wonderful things that people have done with Jamaican coffee? What is wrong with our brain? Why we never come up with those things? We produce fabulous ginger. I don't know that we're doing anything with it.
That's Don's point.
In Dennis, what's wrong with you guys in the private sector?
I don't think that there is anything wrong with the people. I think that people are not incentivized enough, right? So.
Well, what more incentive you need than to do something that is going to make you some rotted profit?
Yeah, but then how many people have that opportunity? So, I mean, all those people you spoke to, most of them I've spoken to them, discussed with them, and they'll tell you how difficult it was, right?
Very difficult.
They'll also tell you that, they had an opportunity and they took it. Not many people have that.
Sure. Dennis, I'm not suggesting that government must sit down on its hands. Government has a responsibility in the matter. No question at all about it. But I don't know if you were on when Densil was on the other day, earlier. He spoke about some project that he had done where he was dealing with private sector manufacturers who for 30 years had not changed one thing about the product. It's the same ingredients, the same process, the same can, the same labeling. And they're just trying to see if they can sell more of it.
But listen, if you have a situation where your environment doesn't push you, incentivize you. So, for example, the whole thing of competition, right? We, for example, said, one of the things that I think has held us up, we have no problem going to other markets and looking for jobs there, and exporting labor. We talk about exporting labor. But talk about importing labor here, you see what the reaction is, right? We don't encourage competition, right, as a policy, right? We talk about it. We don't encourage people to be more productive,
Dennis,
right? We actually reward poor behavior in this country.
I would prefer you tell me that, look, up until now, a businessman would look with great uncertainty at Jamaica's economic future, and therefore you can't expect him. You can't expect him to plunge whole heap of money in research and development to improve
and that's the reason, because you don't see an environment where we're encouraging any long-term growth. What we encourage is short-term and hustling and bad behavior. That's what Jamaica encourages.
I believe that situation is changing, but I may be a minority of one.
Yeah.
When I will say, I'm talking about having been in Parliament for a long time, in government for a long time, that we grew up. Go back to the days of industrialization by invitation, no? We grew up with a private sector that was spoon-fed.
Yes.
And not for hell can some of them believe that we're at a stage where you're big enough now you must start feeding yourself, man. They still want government to do this, and government must do that, and must provide incentive for this, and so on. You know what I mean? And I want to get to a stage, you see, where we'll have many more Thaler-Lynns and many more Butch Hendricksons who go and look and say, no, look, I'm in this thing for the long haul because the horizon looks good. But I can't just depend on things to happen. I'm going to make things happen. And I'm going to invest in some R&D, and I'm going to invest in my workers. And what I'm going to be producing and putting on the market, not just here but abroad in 5 years' time, is completely different from what I'm doing now. I want to go with it.
But PM, why should I do that? And I agree things are changing. But in the past, why should I do that if I could leave school and get into some scamming with the likelihood that I'm not going to be caught?
I take your point, right? I take that point. But what I'm saying is, What I'm saying is, the fact that we have a robust fiscal situation now, the fact that our debt is significantly down, the fact that the horizon is looking so much better, that by itself it will not necessarily change the thinking and the behavior and the culture of some of our people. And I believe that this is a conversation that needs to be directed not only at the Nigel Clarks of this world who make policy, but at the private sector, to say that, look, you have not been as, conscientious as you could have been. And what we're saying is, in the same way we're demanding of government, get it right this time, don't mess up. We need to say to the private sector that, look, you have to be up at the table too, because as Damian said, they are the ones who are going to produce the growth, not government.
Which brings me to my problem, Donna, with your penchant for picking losers as an economic strategy. Because we have a private sector, as the PM has just pointed out, which is accustomed to lobbying their way to protection and special privileges. Then we give government a license to select sectors and activities that it favors. And who you think has the ear of the political decision makers? That very same private sector. So where you think the picking losers permission and money is going to go towards?
I think we should stop talking about the private sector as an undifferentiated mass. It is very differentiated, right? And you have probably the majority are people who have no interest in innovation, who see the short term. I mean, this is not peculiar to Jamaica, who worry that if they do any training, that people are going to be poached. This is universal, right? This is not peculiar to Jamaica. But in every country, you have private sector and you have private sector. So you have people in every country, including our own, who take a slightly more sophisticated view, who understand the risks. They're not about to jump out there and do something stupid, right? But they are interested in doing something different. And I hear the names all the while when I come to Jamaica. People talk about Howard Mitchell, they talk about some people at Mussels, they talk about Hendrickson, they talk about Taylor Lynn, they talk about Dougie O'Rain and Joe Matlon and other people like that and so on. So there are people who are interested in doing things a bit differently, right? But who, of course, have shareholders they have to answer to, okay? So it's not a matter of just jumping out there. And also the problem of state capture is a real problem, right? It's not a problem peculiar to Jamaica. If you want to see state capture, go to India, right? Or go to Vietnam, or go to China,
or South Africa.
Korea. And then you see some serious state capture going on, right? So that everywhere you turn, Maka will joke you in this damn thing, right? Nonetheless, we have to carve a path. And the path, to me, is the immediate short-term things. There are more things going on which are positive than we realize. They're under the radar. There are people who are fighting with training in their firms. They have no support, right? They have no recognition. Nobody's researching it to see the lessons of what works and what doesn't work and why, right? There are more things happening than we realize, is my point. And we need to get hold of those things, really bring them together, focus them, and see how we can improve the process, right? That is what I'm talking about here. And I really do believe that we can make some real gains. It will not be easy, and God knows we make a lot of blunders and probably waste a lot of money in the process, right? But nonetheless, we will have success, right? And that is what I'm talking about. Every country has been through this. I just want to mention, we have, there's an academic named Antonio Andreoni, who I happen to have some contact with, who's worked on this in South Africa and is advising the South African government, who's also advising the Chilean government, who's at London University as well. And we have been discussing his coming down and telling us, giving us some idea of his experiences working through this issue in South Africa and in Chile. And hopefully we'll be able to bring this off maybe in August of this year. He's a very interesting guy, done tons of research on this low-income, middle-income trap business. and is far more knowledgeable than I am on these issues. So that Italian guy who is really, really a very eminent person, very capable, and hopefully we'll be able to bring him down in August and to harass him and hear what he has to say and put our objections to his ideas. And let's see if we can learn something from the experience of South Africa and Chile on this stuff.
Damian, one of the concerns that I have, and Don alluded to it sort of tangentially. One of the concerns I have is that we had grown accustomed over the last 1993, that would be what, 40 years? 30 years. To a new world order, no? Globalization. We had to bring down our tariff barriers and all that kind of thing. I'm a bit concerned that just as we started to get used to this new normal, and just as we trying with our education and everything to equip ourselves to make some runs on this kind of playing field, the playing field is changing on us. Is that real? Or am I being alarmist?
No,
when I hear what is coming out of some of the leaders of some of the major countries in the world, it's almost as if they say that this globalization thing was, wasn't such a good idea.
Well, it's not so much.
Where is that going to leave us?
No. It seems that there is a trend now, certainly compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago, even 30 years ago, a retreat from globalization for two reasons. One is political, that political tensions have arisen and have sharpened, political differences have sharpened. And so, the Russia and the China and the America and the EU are no longer seem aligned and are suspicious of each other. And that tension means that they are using they're using trade policy as instruments of geopolitical policy. And that makes it a much more risky world in which to make investments that depend on the global supply chain. That's point number one. Given that, then there's the business side of it now, where companies recognizing that risk do not want to leave themselves exposed to sudden changes that can disrupt the global supply chain. And so they are investing defensively and in ways that lower their risk, and that sort of separately is adding to the problem. So we're going to have a much more polarized and a world of economic blocks than we had in the past. But that doesn't really change Jamaica's approach to it, in the sense that each country is still going to benefit from taking advantage of opportunities outside of its own economy, and even more so for tiny economies like ours.
Dennis, what's your view? Are we preparing ourselves for a global contour that is likely to change and confuse business people?
I agree totally with what Damian says. I think that's driven more by politics. And until we get some political agreement, then you're going to have this risk, as Damian said, in terms of global trade. And certainly, just to break it down very simply, someone in the U.S., for example, might say, listen, I can make a lot of money in China, but if I were to relocate there, then it might be too great a risk for me. And it's all about risk, and political risk that's driving it. For a country like Jamaica, the only thing, we've always been an open economy. So we've always been susceptible to this sort of thing. What changes, which maybe is not such a change in the 70s and the 80s, is that we have to be careful more about political alignment now because of the daggers drawn by everyone. But I don't think it really changes much for us, because we've always been open, so we've always been subject to the ravages of what happens in other countries, and in particular countries that we have direct trade with.
Well, let me ask you this, because you're close to the private sector. Don mentioned in his article a question of niche targeting, no? And it caused me to think, a lot of our big distributors in Jamaica, you and I know, each year they go to the food fairs in Dubai, and they look for a good price and they sign a contract so that the coconut milk is coming out of Thailand or Sri Lanka, no? And the sausages, the Vienna sausages are coming out of some other place. And sure, it goes to the balance sheet of the company, but it doesn't involve 1 ounce of productive effort on our part here. How many times have we faced this issue, but we just don't seem to be able to absorb it? That look, we can't compete with the Indias of this world in terms of scale of production. But good God, man, Jamaica is so unique in terms of having so many competitive advantages in certain things. Some of it cultural, some of it in terms of our natural assets, no? Why are we not niching? Why are we not saying, now listen, no? We can't produce everything, but we are going to produce the best coffee product in the world, or the best ginger, or the best cocoa. I'm told, for example, that our cocoa in terms of its quality is far superior to what comes out of Kenya and those places.
Yeah.
But we can't grow cocoa in Jamaica anymore. Our cocoa farmers can't pay people to pick it.
Yeah, well, the problem that we have, it again comes back to policy and as I say, labor market and the uncertainty. I mean, so for example, in the 80s, it was our 90s or whenever, we had a banana quota. We could never fulfill a quota that was given to us without competition because we had so much uncertainty. I mean...
Yeah, but I want to put some direct questions to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
We harvest conch in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
And we yank the conch out of the shell and put it in a freezer. And we send it to all parts of the world. So we can process the conch here. We can make some conch products and freeze them and can them.
But then it comes back to risk again. I mean, if I have my money to invest and I can get a greater return on investment than just selling the raw material rather than putting it into production, and then I have labor challenges that face me. My production is uncertain because of crime issues.
Dennis,
why am I going to take all that risk when I don't have to do it?
I know you're too long, man. You're giving me excuses.
No, it's not excuses, PM. Why am I going to take that risk when I don't? It's just like in the 90s. I mean, when the government
because when you take that risk,
interest rate. Because why am I going to put my money into production when I can just
because when you
make interest?
Because when you take those risks, the Glenn Christians and Butch Hendricksons of this world go have to borrow money from you.
But that's fine. But the other thing is, I think niche is important, but I don't really believe much in the niche thing, right? In terms of our competitive advantage, and maybe something has changed, right? Damian can tell.
Well, we could well call tourism a niche,
It's tourism.
And look how well it has done.
Yeah, I know, but that is our competitive advantage. I believe that what we need to do is instead of saying, primarily we're going to go and look at a market, let's produce for the tourists that come here and encourage more to come here by reducing crime and fixing up the place.
I have to pull the curtain down. I'm in trouble. I'm out of time completely. I have to thank all of you. Dan Robotham, my friend from long time. Thank you so much for coming on today. Damian, thank you for joining me in studio. And Dennis, as always, you like the poor are with me always. So thank all of you. I hope my listeners enjoyed the discussion today. We're not finished with it, we perhaps will return to it in another form not long from now. But thank all my guests. Thank Densil Williams, who had to leave us earlier. That's been it for today. Hope to be back next week, Monday, to do it all over again, to take a different topic and see how deeply we can dive into it to get a better understanding. God bless all of you. Have a good week.